In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
We now come to the next question. What were the specific Gnostic texts reported by Hippolytus that offered parallel to Jung's own visionary experiences? Throughout his later writings, Jung frequently cited Gnostic materials preserved by Hippolytus. Jung ultimately judged that Hippolytus must have been a Gnostic sympathizer, occultly conveying texts and teachings under the cloak of the orthodox critique. These many references aside, there are two key Gnostic myths related by Hippolytus, however you might want to say it, that strikingly reflected Jung's experiences up until 1915. The first was the story of Simon Magus and his consort Helena. The second is the story of Sophia and the Demiurge. Both tales subsequently intertwined themselves in parts of Liber Novus, composed after 1915.
The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey everybody, I'm John and this is the Abracast. Thank you for tuning in. This is going to be what is it going to be? I'm falling apart already. Gnostic Jung Part 2. We are going to be going back to a book we haven't dealt with in a while because we've been in the Red Book for so long. The book that we're talking about is The Search for Roots by Alfred Ribby. However, we are focusing on the foreword of the book, which is written by Lance Owens. And before we get started, the last Gnostic Jung episode, I embarrassed myself because I didn't know a word. I had to look it up, and I put it in the notes of episode 1, and it's going to come up again. And that's the word hermeneutics. Hermeneutics. And that just means the branch of knowledge that deals with the interpretation, especially of the Bible or literary texts. So now that we're through with the Liber Novus or the Red Book, I thought it would be interesting to go in and touch some of the bases. Again, we did this in Gnostic Jung Part 1, but I thought since we were done, we could kind of go in and touch a few more, and we definitely want to get into this character of Philemon, which showed up towards the end of the book. And also we're going to mention Simon Magus and Helena. And if you're interested in the kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about, I encourage you to check out Abracast.com. Go to the feature topic link. In the sex magic area of the feature topic link, there's some Simon Magus episodes. And also in the Gnosticism section, you're going to find Simon Magus episodes and also Demiurge, Sophia and Demiurge stuff in there too. There's plenty of it. If this stuff is speaking to you and you want some more content, that's where you might be able to find it. While you're there, check out some books, tarot cards, t-shirts. Check out all that jazz while you're at Abracast.com. All right, so let's get into this thing. back to it. Let's get back to it, I should say. And hey, well, I'm also, before I get too far into this, just want to remind everybody that there's going to be a break coming up. It's planned. It's not pod fade. If you see some weird stuff happening on the feed, it's just, it's me giving you guys some love and appreciation during my vacation. Philemon, Simon Magus, and Helena. Intriguingly, at the conclusion of Liber Novus, it is disclosed that Philemon, who is Jung's ghostly guru, prominently mentioned in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, was the ancient Gnostic teacher Simon Magus. While considering how Jung read Simon's history, one must keep this strange fact in mind. In telling the story of Simon Magus, Schultz quotes Hippolytus Mead's Fragments of a Faith Forgotten. In his earlier work, Simon Magus include all the same materials. The later work by Mead adds quotations from other ancient sources that mentions Simon Magus. So what they're talking about is the Gnostics were stamped out. They were all but wiped off the face of the planet by the Roman Catholic Church, right? During the Cathar Crusade and other things. So what happened is all of their materials, all of their writing, the vast majority of it was just destroyed, as these guys were literally heretics. And only with the Nag Hammadi text were we able to reclaim some of this stuff found, centuries later. So the idea of Gnosticism and what was known about it before we found the Nag Hammadi text was kept alive in this guy Mead, or this guy's book of Fragments of a Faith Forgotten. It comes up a lot when we talk about Gnosticism, right? So that's just where we are. So they're trying to figure out how Jung might have known this stuff, just extrapolating what he could from this Fragments of a Faith Forgotten. And this is a classic example of, the victor writes history, right? So here we go. Simon Magus, the magician, is the first historical figure named in the ancient accounts of Gnosis. The date of his life remains unclear. This guy was great, Simon Magus. He flew around. He hung out with Helen of Troy. He did all kinds of cool stuff. Most reports place Simon Magus in the first century of the Christian era. Later, critics generally identified Simon as the father of Gnostic heresy. Writing in the late 2nd century, the early Orthodox apologist Irenaeus called him the Samaritan Simon, from whom all the heresies took their origin. Hippolytus is, however, the most complete primary source on Simon Magus. He recounts both Simon's history and quotes from writing attributed by him. Accounts of Simon's life emphasize that he had a consort named Helena. Later, critics asserted that Helena was a prostitute whom Simon had purchased in the Phoenician port of Tyre. We recount this whole story. I believe there's 3 or 4 just Simon Magus episodes that we've done in the past. And then liberated. He liberated the whore that he bought, is what there is. I stepped all over my whole sentence. So Simon told the tale differently, adding a mythic archetypical dimension. He proclaimed that in Helena, he found the liberated and deific feminine power hidden within physical creation. This is the En Sof. Helena was a manifestation of the divine Sophia, the wisdom. Through her mediation, Simon had met the primal Eponia. The term Eponia, imperfectly translated by the words thought or conception, the En Sof, this is the perfect thought, appears often in subsequent Gnostic mythologies as the title for the feminine emanation manifest within the primordial mystery of divinity. Simon says of her, wisdom is the first conception or thought of my mind, the mother of all, by whom in the beginning I conceived in my mind the making of all the angels and archangels. Using gender as a metaphor, Simon explained that the masculine mind, or logos, was the primordial relationship with the feminine syzygy, which Simon named Eponia, the primal first thought of the divine mind. G.R.S. Mead commented upon the story in the Fragments of a Faith Forgotten explicitly, noting its philosophical nature. The Logos and his thought, the world soul, were symbolized as the sun, Simon, and the moon, Selene, or Helen of Troy, which is the human soul fallen into matter, and Simon, the mind, which brings about her redemption. It's a terrifying story when you get into the Simon and Helena stuff. When Jung met this text in 1915, would he have seen a reflection of his own experience? It seems as though he did. So, while going through Liber Novus, I made a point over and over again, wherever I found it in the text, to bring up this concept that he had about his soul being female, his mortal, physical, crude body or whatever, being a male. By necessity, the soul has to be the female, because his whole bit was to unify the opposites. His whole gimmick was to unify these opposites. I feel like I'm chattier than I have been in a while. Anyhow, so in a vision recorded at the beginning of his imaginative journey during December 1913, Jung had met Elijah, we remember, in Salome, which we remember upon first encountering Salome, he was shocked by her presence, and he questioned, was she not vain greed and criminal lust? Salome nonetheless declared her love for him and wished to become his bride. Jung realized that he also loved Salome. In the draft of Liber Novus, composed in 1914 through 1915, he penned a reflection on his encounter with Salome. Therein, he ponders the relationship of the masculine mind, described as forethought or logos, with Salome, which he quotes with eros. This commentary parallels the logos Eponia relationship expounded by Simon Magus, his consideration of Helena. In the 1920s, Jung wrote yet another private analysis of his encounter with Elijah and Salome, and there he affirmed they might just as well been called Simon Magus and Helena. Jung also found a more intimate mirror of the tale of Simon and Helena in his personal life. But here the details remained veiled. Like Simon with Helena, Jung's encounter with the mystery of the soul was apparently facilitated by his relationship to a woman. On 14 November 1913, Jung wrote in his journal the following comment. Addressed to the soul. And I found you again only through the soul of the woman. It might be surmised that he was referring to his relationship with Toni Wolff, the woman who, at this complex juncture in his life, apparently assisted him in his mythopic. I'm going to do it this way. Assisted him with his mythopoetic journey. Whatever the manner in which the relationship is conjectured later in his psychological commentary on anima and animus, Jung did state that the anima can be realized only through a relationship to a partner of the opposite sex. The complex liaison with the anima not the enema. The anima played a foundational role in Jung's psychology, and Simon's consort Helena is often mentioned. In 1927, he wrote the anima type is presented in the most succinct and pregnant form in the Gnostic legend of Simon Magus. The universal root, Hippolytus, also supplies proportions of a text attributed to Simon Magus called The Great Announcement or The Great Expectations. Much later, Jung quotes this remarkable, as he called it, text in the Mysterium Conjunctionis and gives it an extended commentary. In the Gnosis of Simon Magus, Jung writes, Helen is Prota, Enoa, Septinia, and Epinona. Eponia. Prot, Enonia, Septinia, and Eponia. The latest designation also occurs in Hippolytus, for Eponia herself dwelt in Helen at that time. In the Great Explanation, Simon says, there are two offshoots from all the aeons, having neither beginning nor end, from one root. And this root is certain power and invisible and incomprehensible silence. One of them appears on high and is a great power, and the mind of the whole, who rules all things, is a male. And the other below is a great thought, a female, giving birth to all things. Simon had more to say that would have interested Jung in 1915, as reported by Hippolytus. Simon also indicates that there is a great and boundless power. It has been sealed, hidden, and concealed, and placed within the dwelling that we call humankind. And he says that a man here below, born of blood, is the dwelling, and that the boundless power dwells in him, which he says is the universal root. This power has twofold nature. One part is concealed inwardly, and the other is outwardly manifested. Furthermore, the concealed parts are hidden in the manifested, and in the manifested produced by the concealed. The concealed portion must be met through imagining and by art. Otherwise, it will perish unknown. All of these texts roused Jung's attention, as evidenced by his use of the material in the Mysterium Conjunctionis many decades later. But then again, the question is, did he see in them a reflection of his own experiences recorded through 1915? On the onset of Liber Novus, Jung encountered contrasting realities, concealed with manifest, one reflecting the other. The concealed had been revealed to him through images, through the art, through the mythopoetic imagination. Jung gave this summary of the revelation of the concealed. The world of the inner is as infinite as the world of the outer. Just as you become part of the manifold essence of the world through your bodies, you also become part of the manifold essence of the inner world through your soul. The inner world is truly infinite, in no way poorer than the outer one. Man lives in two worlds. In Liber Novus, Jung was gathering empirical evidence for a collective foundation, or a primordial rhizome underlying consciousness in his scientific writing. He later termed it the collective unconscious. Simon Magus, the universal root, seems an apt analog to Jung's later conceptualization of a collective unconscious. Jung's relationship with Simon Magus became even more complex and peculiar around 1916 in an episode during the summer of 1916 recorded in his journal and recounted in the last pages of Liber Novus. Jung was walking in the garden with Philemon. A figure appeared to them, and Jung identified him in the journal as Jesus Christ. Philemon addressed Christ, "My master, my brother." Christ responded but recognized Philemon as Simon Magus. And Philemon explained to Christ that his name was once Simon Magus, but now he has become Philemon. In the Septem Sermonis ad Mortos, the Septem Sermonis ad Mortos, which is the 7 sermons to the dead, I believe. My Latin's a little rusty, okay? Are recorded in a more fully elaborated form in the last section of Liber Novus, compiled in 1917. In this final version of the sermons, Philemon, who was identified in 1916 as Simon Magus, appears vested in white robes of an Alexandrian Gnostic priest. Resting his hands on Jung's shoulder, Philemon, not Jung, or the Gnostic teacher Balasades, addresses the sermons to the dead. And in this version of a homiletic dialogue between Philemon and Jung follows each sermon. Philemon therein declares to Jung that the statements in the sermons are an expression of his knowledge, his gnosis. Jung painted a portrait of Philemon, or Simon Magus, during 1924 in his Red Book. The picture, he inscribes the Greek in appellation, "Father of the Prophets, beloved Philemon." On the facing page, he painted an image of a veiled woman standing on an altar within a sanctuary. Above her head, he inscribed, "Dea Septena in Mysterioso." The wisdom of God is mystery. These two facing portraits mark principal companions met during the visionary journey. They form a thematic conclusion to Jung's transcription of Liber Novus into the red leather folio volume. Around the time Jung finished these images, he had begun to construct the construction of his tower at Bollingen. Above the door of his tower, he carved a dedication consecrating the place, Philemonis Sacrum, or the Shrine of Philemon. On the bedroom wall upstairs in the tower, a large mural format, he again painted an image of Philemon. Above that painting, he added the appellation Philemon of the Prophet's primal father. Jung obviously had a formidable relationship with this figure named Philemon, who was also anciently known as Simon Magus. No less complex was his relationship with the Protean female power, met in the guise of his soul. In 1924, he named her Sapientia, Sophia, the wisdom of God in a mystery. Both figures apparently integrated themselves within Jung's perception of Gnostic heritage.
Learn more at Abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that, plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at subscribestar.com.
Sophia, the Demiurge, and the Septem Sermones ad Mutoros. And the published edition of Liber Novus includes 3 appendices provided as an integral part of the editorial apparatus constructed by Sonu Shamdasani. Each appendix offers a glimpse into Jung's journal accounts. These are indispensable to the understanding of the mythic framework within the sections of Liber Novus composed after 1915, the months during which Jung confronted his roots in the Gnostic tradition. The first of the supplements, Appendix A, supplies a facsimile copy of a page from Black Book 5, on which Jung carefully sketched his first symbolic mandala, the Systema Mundatotius, apparently done around mid-January 1916. Jung's drawing might be most aptly described not as a mandala, a term that Jung would not use until several years later, but of a Gnostic aeonology. This complex symbolic figure would be interpreted by some 2 weeks later in the text Jung penned and called Seven Sermons to the Dead, Jung's address to the ghostly horde of Anabaptists returned from Jerusalem who rang his doorbell in late January 1916. The third supplement, Appendix C, again reproduces the Black Book 5. This entry is dated 16 January 1916. It is an astounding text in which the feminine voice of Jung's soul reveals to him a story that will be recognized by every student of Gnosticism as the foundational myth of the tradition, the myth of Sophia and the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth. I'm sorry, I just love saying Yaldabaoth. In classic Gnostic mythology, Sophia, wisdom, was a feminine aeon, a twin archetype or syzygy of the masculine logos. She is the feminine aspect of divinity indwelling creation, much like the anima mundi of alchemical myth. Sophia is presented within the very tissue of the cosmos, the consciousness, in the Gnostic drama of creation. An abortive emanation had separated from Sophia soon after her entry into the depths of the coming cosmos. This defective child grew into a fiery cosmic force that falsely claimed to be the singular and supreme deity. As a self-declared ruler of the material world, he sought to hold humanity in his thraldom. This was the Demiurge. Gnostic myths gave him many different names, such as Saklas and Yaldabaoth. Jung called him Abraxas. In this ancient and oft restated Gnostic myth, Sophia was the opponent of the Demiurge. She was the higher power who awakened in humankind the knowledge of their intrinsic inner light and origin, thereby liberating them from the deceitful worldly lordship of the Demiurge. Over the past century, several scholars of Gnosticism have argued that the absence of a myth of the Demiurge, the mythology, should not be properly categorized as Gnostic, at least not in a classical sense. This subject has colored some past interpretations of the Septem Sermones ad Mutoros. Occasional critics have contended that Jung's sermons do not explicitly include the story of the Demiurge. Thus, it is suggested Jung did not understand the core Gnostic mythology of the sermons, are not a true exemplar of Gnostic mythologum. Mythologum, I love it. Gnostic mythologum. However, it is now fully manifested that this specious critique results from a misreading and a misunderstanding of the complex figure of Abraxas, who appears in the second sermon of the Septem Sermones. Jung's journal entry, dated 16 January 1916, reproduces Appendix C of Liber Novus, removes all questions about this issue. Abraxas is the Demiurge in Jung's myth. In this journal entry, Jung records the following words spoken to him by the soul who assumes the voice of Sophia. Her address is unarguably a rendition of the primal Gnostic myth of the Demiurge, here named Abraxas. And here it goes. You should worship only one god. The other gods are unimportant. Abraxas is to be feared. Therefore it was deliverance which he separated himself from me. Note that the soul is taking the voice of Sophia, the separation of the Demiurge from Sophia. When he separated himself from me is a key part of the Gnostic myth. She continues. You do not need to seek him. He will find you, just like Eros. He is the god of the cosmos, extremely powerful and fearful. He is the creative drive. He is the form and formation, just as much as matter and force. Therefore, he is above all the light and dark gods. He tears away souls and casts them into procreation. He is the creative and the created. He is the God who always renews himself in days and months and years in human life, in ages, in people, in the living, in the heavenly bodies he compels. He is unsparing. If you worship him, you increase his power over you. Thereby, it becomes unbearable. You will have dreadful trouble getting clear of him. So remember him. Do not worship him. But also do not imagine that you can flee him, since he is all around you. You must be in the middle of life, surrounded by death on all sides, stretched out like one crucified. You hang in him, the fearful and the overpowering. But you have the one God, the wonderfully beautiful, all-kind and solitary, star-like, unmoving. He is older and wiser than the Father. He who has a safe hand, who leads you among all the darkness and death scares of the dreadful Abraxas. He gives joy and peace. Since he is beyond death and beyond what is subject to change, he is no servant and no friend of Abraxas. The journal entry unambiguously identifies the figure of Abraxas, who shortly thereafter appears in the sermons as the Demiurge of classical Gnostic mythology. Identified the identification of Abraxas with the Demiurge is further established in the manuscript of Liber Novus, wherein his transcription Jung substitutes the term ruler of the world for the name Abraxas, originally written in his Black Book journal. Jung recognized the Gnostic provenance of this January 1916 apparition. A Sophianic voice had declared to him the fundamental Gnostic assertion: you have in you the one God, the wonderfully beautiful and kind, the solitary, star-like, unmoving. Jung turned to that star, and it became his life's guide. 2 years after the beginning of the journey of Liber Novus, Jung was now placing his visionary experiences into interpretive form, impregnated by the reading of Gnostic mythology. In his journal entry from January 1916, the soul speaks to him in the vocabulary of Gnostic myth. 2 weeks later, in the same vocabulary, enters into the initial journal formulation of the 7 sermons to the dead. In the summer of 1916, his guide, Philemon, is revealed to be Simon Magus. Jung's myth had met its rhizome, and he knew it. Of course, one should note that the basic declaration of the Demiurge had already appeared in another form. At the very beginning of Liber Novus, Jung finished this section of the manuscript text in its final calligraphic rendering into the Red Book earlier in 1915. In the preamble he penned in the first pages of Liber Primus, Jung confronts 2 powers, the spirit of the time and the spirit of the depths. The spirit of the time unmistakably manifests as the Demiurge, declaring in a fashion typical of the Gnostic Demiurge, there is no other power before him, and the spirit of the depths rebuffs the Demiurge, claiming sovereignty, and enters Jung to look beyond his fabrications. What Jung encounters and records 2 years later in 1916 is not a new theme. Rather, it is a metamorphosis in voice, vocabulary, and the mythological identification of his guide. In 1916, Gnostic mythology had become a symbolic vessel of expression for his visions. In 1916, Jung had seemingly found the root of his myth, and it was the myth of Gnosis. I see no evidence that it was ever changed over the next 40 years. He would proceed to construct an interpretive reading of the Gnostic tradition, a cult course across the Christian aeon in Hermeticism, alchemy, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism. In this vast hermeneutical enterprise, Jung was building a bridge across time, leading back to the foundation stone of classic Gnosticism, the bridge that led forward towards a new and coming aeon was footed in the stone rejected by the builders 2,000 years ago. So just a quick reminder that he mentions a whole bunch of stuff here. Alchemy, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism. If you're interested in any of that stuff, I encourage you to check out the featured topic link at Abracast.com. All right, we're going to do some more here. Alchemy and Gnostic studies. Jung began his focused study of alchemy in the mid-30s. Over the ensuing decades, his detailed, extensive, and very complex writings concerning alchemy have left many readers completely bewildered. In light of Liber Novus, Jung's mission is finally evident. The interpretive key he used to unlock the mystery of alchemy was integrally connected to his own earlier visionary experience. He entered the alchemical retort himself in 1913, and from the alembic of personal experience, he extracted a stone. Those who have spent a few years studying Liber Novus find that there are many reasons why Jung discovered in the alchemical opus a reflection of his experience. After meeting Liber Novus, one reads Jung's writing on alchemy with eyes wide open. Sonu Shamdasani proposes that in considering Jung's study of alchemy, we must now understand the real referent of his alchemical work is not to be medieval alchemy per se, but the symbolism of the individualization process. The hermeneutic key that Jung was using to read alchemical texts consisted on his own self-experimentation he presented in Liber Novus. The same hermeneutic key opens the door to understanding Jung's repetitive reference to the ancient Gnostic text documents dating to the beginning of the Christian age. His interpretive referent remained his own experience and even crystallized in Liber Novus. Other than works from the alchemical tradition, there was no categorical source Jung turned to more frequently than his major writings to illustrate the dynamics and contents of the collective unconscious. In the constellation of self and the ancient texts of the Gnostics, Jung is quoted in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, saying, "When I began to understand alchemy, I realized that it is represented like historical link with Gnosticism, and that a continuity therefore exists between past and present. Alchemy formed the bridge on one hand to the past, to Gnosticism, and on the other into the future of modern psychology and the unconscious. The possibility of the comparison with alchemy and the uninterrupted intellectual chain back to Gnosticism gave substance to my psychology." At Yale University in 1937, Jung asserted the religious or philosophical views of ancient alchemy were clearly Gnostic. When they listed keynotes of the Gnostics, he had entered into alchemical tradition, including alchemy's recognition of the Sophianic anima mundi and the opposing Demiurge. Jung saw his life's work, or his psychology, if one wishes to use that narrower category to circumscribe his expansive vision, as organically connected to the tradition with roots in the experience of Gnosis. This connection back to the Gnosis manifests that the beginning of the Christian aeon was the deep soil, the bedrock that rooted his life and history. Jung's encounter with Gnostic literature begun years before his study of the alchemical tradition intimately entangled itself in the primary expansion of or expression of his experiences in Liber Novus. Gnostic mythologisms therefore became for Jung a prototypical image of his individuation. Gnosis and the New Aeon, based on his readings of ancient texts. Jung judged that the Gnostics of the first century had essentially done what he had done and seen what he had also seen. But there existed yet another more deeper perception behind Jung's special relationship with that Gnosis of antiquity that has not yet received wide attention. I suggest it was the most important factor Jung identified as historically uniting his experience with classical Gnosticism. It placed ancient Gnosis in a unique temporal situation relative to all other later manifestations of the tradition, including those he recognizes alchemy, Kabbalah, and other heretical movements emerging during the second millennium of the current epoch. Not only had the Gnostics met and engaged a psychic reality emerging from the depths, but they had undergone their experiences of mythopoetic power, a uniquely transformative moment in the evolution of human consciousness, the threshold of a new aeon. And so 2,000 years later, had Carl Gustav Jung. Jung composed the first page of the Red Book in 1915. On that introductory leaf, he graphically intertwined a prophecy of the future and a coming of a new age, an epochal turning point in human consciousness. It was, as he announced with the first words of Liber Novus, the way of what is to come. This was the keynote of the visionary journey, and it continued to be reflected through the text of Liber Novus. 2 millennia long Christian age, coincident with the astrological aeon of Pisces, was coming to an end. A new God image was seeking constellation in human consciousness. Although this keynote was a foundational motivation to his subsequent work for decades, Jung did not feel free to publicly disclose it. Perhaps he thought it too would not be understood. Then, in February 1944, at age 68, Jung slipped in the snow and broke his ankle. This modest injury and associated immobilization led to the development 12 days later of a life-threatening pulmonary embolism and a heart attack. For 3 weeks, he hung between life and death, and in that twilight, he was immersed in a prolonged series of visions. They seemed to the end of his journey, the conclusion of the story he had lived. It's impossible to convey the beauty and intensity of emotion during those visions. They were the most tremendous things I have ever experienced, said Carl. I would never have imagined that any such experience was possible. It was not a product of imagination. The visions and experiences were utterly real. There was nothing subjective about them. They all had a quality of absolute objectivity. We shy away from the word eternal, but I can describe the experience only as the ecstasy of the non-temporal state in which present, past, and future are one. Everything that happens in time had been brought together into a concrete whole. Nothing was distributed over time. Nothing could be measured by temporal concepts. The illness, these visions in a year of convalescence, soon followed by a second serious cardiac event in November 1946, deeply affected Jung's perspective upon his life, his story, and the tasks remaining to him. They marked the summation of an experience foreshadowed by Liber Novus and motivated formation of his last four major works. The books I have called his last quartet, Aeon, was the initial work composed in this period. He explains, "Before my illness, I had often asked myself if I were permitted to publish or even speak of my secret knowledge. I later set it all down in Aeon. I realized it was my duty to communicate these thoughts, yet I doubted whether I was allowed to give expression to them. During my illness, I received, confirmed, and I now knew that everything had meaning and that everything was perfect." First manuscript page for Liber Novus, penned by Jung in 1915, deeply considered, dense with verbal and pictorial imagery, formed in response to the spirit of the depths and the complexly crafted commentary in Aeon, published in 1951, both declare the dawning of a new age. Shortly thereafter, Jung feverishly wrote Answer to Job, his most personal and controversial confession. He said it had been unbidden, even against his will. It too was a declaration of visionary insights underlying Liber Novus. Sonu Shamdasani had described Jung's Answer to Job as the articulation of the theology of Liber Novus, and not theology in an orthodox sense. To the contrary, it is a bold statement of the Gnostic myth, spoken in a new voice for a new time. Talking with Mircea Eliade in 1952, Jung explained Answer to Job, which was then arousing wrath among theologians. He said, "The book has always been on my mind, but I waited 40 years to write it. Almost 4 decades earlier, in January of 1916, the soul had given Jung the tale that he retold in Answer to Job, a story of the Demiurge and Sophia. It had been on his mind ever afterwards, awaiting and then decisively demanding contemporary declaration." Jung saw humanity facing an apocalyptic task. We stand before a pivotal moment in our story, and we also need the Sophia that Job was seeking. The prior anamnesis, the prior remembering of Sophia had come at the threshold of the Christian Aeon, as witnessed by the Gnostics who heard her tale 2,000 years ago. However, over the succeeding millennia of the Christian epoch, the experience of her had almost been forgotten. Now Sophia was returning, and Pope Pius's 1950 pronouncement of the Assumption of the Virgin, Jung identified a modern dogmatic evolution had evidenced Sophia's myth awakening to a new life. For Jung, it was a sign of the times and an independent confirmation of his own Sophianic encounter years before. In Aeon, Jung asserted for the Gnostics, and this is their real secret, the psyche existed as a source of knowledge. What do the knowers know? This statement succinctly summarizes Jung's defining perception about the nature of Gnosis. His experience was the foundation for the definition. Beginning in 1913, Jung turned to the soul seeking knowledge. It came. What he saw and heard was incredible. It stood beyond belief. He himself could not believe it. I do not want to believe it. I do not need to believe it, nor could I believe it. How can one believe such? My mind would need to be totally confused to believe such things, given their nature. They are not improbable. But what could not be believed he now knew. Not with reference to the opinions of the ancients or this or that authority, but because I have experienced it. It has happened thus in me. And it certainly happened in a way that I neither expected nor wished for. Jung did not use writings of the Gnostics as sources for his psychology. He turned to Gnostic accounts seeking confirmatory resources that supported his observations about the mythopoetic depths underlying the consciousness. Whatever his sympathies, Jung was simply not an ancient Gnostic. He could not model himself in that archaic mold. He was a modern man, perhaps even the first truly modern man, establishing his link between Gnosis of the old and the new. Praxis was, however, an undertaking with a hidden significance for Jung. In Liber Novus, Carl Gustav Jung received a vocation that burned him with an epochal task. To give birth to the ancient in new time is creation. This creation of the new, and that redeems me. Salvation is the resolution of the task. The task is to give birth to the new, or to the old. God damn it. The task is to give birth to the old in a new time. To understand more than this and that, Jung, it is interpretive. We ponder the way he worked the redemptive task of giving birth to the old in a new time. It is a complex enterprise. It demands the conjoint consideration of old traditions and of a new book. In the labor, many prior assumptions and obscuring assertions will need to be stripped away. The nature of Jungian studies may even be fundamentally changed. Nonetheless, by delving into the depths of Jung's relationship with the Gnostic tradition, we will unearth a key that unlocks transformative perspectives on Jung's hermeneutics of creative imagination and of the vision of the coming new chapter in our human story. In the search for roots, C.G. Jung and the tradition of Gnosis, Dr. Alfred Ribby provides us with a place to begin that task of tasks.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
If you're considering supporting the show on Subscribestar, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on over there. The degree of the Red Archive, which is the $1 a month, you get access to some bonus audio, but there's also 50 plus hours of archived episodes. These are older episodes. They're not on the stream anymore. It's the only place to find them is in the Red Archive.